come on. Ass! Funny enough, you wouldn't expect Castlevania to be the idea for a cartoon. Yes, in the video game world, Castlevania is a Konami classic, where you can find the medium's most iconic depictions of the Universal and Hammer monsters as you play a vampire hunter of the Belmont family and use your whip to climb up a complex castle and face Dracula himself. Sure, it's not a perfect franchise, and it does have its history of games that should have a wooden stake be stabbed onto their hearts, but when they are good, they establish the powerful legacy of the franchise. They're definitely not easy, but they've certainly made their mark in gaming history. So much so that the Belmonts found their way onto Super Smash Bros.
Be gone! You don't belong in this world, monster!
However, this is a franchise that takes itself kinda seriously, where it doesn't shy away from having legitimate horror. So maybe it was debatable if Castlevania was a good idea to be the subject of a marketable cartoon. Not to mention that the last time the franchise was in the world of animation was in Captain N. And I don't know if I'm down to see Simon Belmont become Link Hogthrob again.
Don't fret your little mega mind. There's only one person who can cheer up the princess, and I'm looking at him. Simon Belmont takes orders from only one person. Simon Belmont. Personally, I wasn't lucky at all. No, it was skill and razor-sharp timing that allowed me to rescue you and save Videoland from that evil...
Thank you, Simon.
So it's safe to say that making this idea family-friendly is out of the question. But can adapting Castlevania into animation even work in the first place? Well, either way, Frederator thought it was worth a shot. Just like some of the games, Castlevania's travel to becoming the show we know today was quite brutal. Going all the way back to early 2007, Frederator Studios wanted to make a direct-to-video animated film adaptation of the Castlevania game. Specifically, Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, which featured more protagonists like the vampire-hunting Trevor Belmont, the magician Sypha Belnades, and Dracula's son, Alucard. There technically was also the pirate Grant Dynasty in the game, but he was cut off from the animated project because he would seem out of place. But it didn't change that the game had so much material that the plan for a movie evolved into a whole trilogy. However, developing the script turned out to be as difficult as killing a real vampire and ended up lost in development hell in 2008. There have been some ideas of what else they could do with it, like a live-action film, but it wouldn't be until several years later when Powerhouse Animation Studios made a deal with Netflix and brought back Frederator into the project in order to turn that script of the trilogy into a complete animated series, which the first season finally concluded this production journey a whole decade after its inception on July 7th, 2017. And even just by starting with 4 episodes, it was already a video game adaptation like no other.
My father has to die. We three. We can destroy him.
I could say right now that I am familiar with Castlevania, but I'm not like an adamant fan that has played all the games. I have played a handful in the past, but not necessarily enough to say that I'm a Castlevania expert. And no, I haven't played Dracula's Curse, honestly. However, I have heard a lot of great things about this series, especially when it is one of Netflix's biggest animated hits. Like, even if it's not a movie, it's a prominent example of how the video game curse is dying. And considering that this is a show about killing demons and slaying monsters, who better to go and break that curse? Much like Dracula's Curse, the best way to simply summarize the series is that a vampire hunter, a young magician, and the son of Dracula team up to save humanity by going into Dracula's castle, take down demons and monsters along the way, and kill the infamous vampire before he does any harm to anyone else. I'll start off by saying that while this may not be the type of adaptation meant to serve the fans references to the game so that they can point to their screens and say, "I know that thing!" This really does try its best to capture the feel of a Castlevania game, at least with the visuals. Taking inspiration from Ayami Kojima's work in Symphony of the Night, the designs depict a highly detailed look that stays true to the style of Castlevania, while maintaining that sense of realism and have the colors be more muted to stay within the themes of religion, its more somber tone for the viewers to take this a little more seriously, and to establish its setting in the late 15th century Europe. The only exception to this is the more fantastical elements that appear. Rather they be magic that's usually conjured up by Sypha or the powers of hell, or the colorful demons that have been summoned that highlight the show's creativity with many different monstrosities that the animators could think up. But if it wants to make sure that it perfectly captures the feel of the games, then the series had to make sure that it can nail the action. And I can confidently say that the action scenes are some of the best parts of the show. Already, the animation itself is fantastic. I've already talked about the beautiful designs, but the team at Powerhouse did a great job capturing the anime style, even to the point of getting anime veterans involved to get the look right. However, when Trevor cracks out his whip or when the monsters start attacking, that's when the animation can be best described as next level, where the intensity is at an all-time high, the characters and creatures let out all their creative potential with their abilities, and the people and the camera moves around in ways that are admirably crafted in a uniquely engaging experience. However, I do want to add that as it is an adult animated series, this does not shy away from the violence. In fact, calling this a bloodbath would be subtle. Imagine if everything that's green in the Kids' Choice Awards is red. Add in some guts and organs and sprinkle in some body parts, and you pretty much got a good idea of Castlevania's level of violence. If you're someone who doesn't like the sight of blood, then this show is definitely not for you. In fact, I'm even surprised that you're still watching this. Aren't you a little freaked out by the scenes I'm putting up here? However, if you're the kind that loves to see those types of messy horror flicks and watch bodies get mangled up, then you will adore Castlevania. One episode alone can fill your need of media violence for a whole week.
Brave livestock! Look out!
However, the show isn't always about fighting monsters and waves of blood. Within this adventure, there is an interesting commentary regarding religion, specifically how Christianity seized power during the 15th century. I'll get more into this later, but I'd argue that the true villain of the series is not Dracula or the forces of hell, but rather the corruption within the church and how they'd even break their own rules just so that they could maintain control over their land and keep their people uneducated enough so that the leaders could easily manipulate their way of thinking. Anyone who is more intellectually and more progressively advanced than them, like Dracula or Lisa Tepesh, is viewed as the enemy, and they'll do whatever it takes to banish them from the earth so that they could dispose of any threat to their power. Some could say that we've moved on from that style of dictatorship, but what's most interesting is how this shares some parallels to today's nationalist and authoritarian brand of control. Even if the purpose is more political than religion, they all tell the same story of greed, corruption, and hypocrisy that technically goes against everything that Christianity stands for. The show so far has a lot of amazing things going for it. It looks beautiful, it's action-packed, and it can be pretty smart. While that is a perfect recipe for an awesome game, I wouldn't say those are the main reasons why you would want to come back to watch episode after episode. Maybe, but not necessarily the key reason. If there is one thing that this has over the early games, it's how we really get to know these characters. If you're gonna save the human race from being completely extinct, then there has to be some humans that you gotta enjoy so that you root for them to save the world. Such as the case with Trevor Belmont, the last surviving member of the Belmont family that is the vampire hunting equivalent of Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean films. There was a time when he was part of a great legion of hunters with amazing skills, but since the death of his family, he became a shell of what he used to be. All washed up, his hunting techniques are rusty, and the only thing he really cares about is beer. But once Dracula's war became more unavoidable, he has no choice but to straighten himself up and bring honor back to the Belmont name. Along his side, there's Sypha Belnades, a magician and a scholar who is part of the Speakers who joins Trevor to stop Dracula, and later falls in love with him, and Alucard, Dracula's son who opposes his father's plan of genocide, and even if he's not a fan of people, he sees the potential in the other two where they can end his dad's tirade. What I love the most among them, and what makes them likable on their adventure, is the chemistry they have amongst each other, which helps lighten the mood from its continuous somber tone with some passive-aggressive humor. Sure, they're often being dicks to each other, but it's in the way that friends usually troll one another.
I discovered an entire box of spells about Venuses.
You're certain it was one of his ancestors? You didn't find it under his childhood bed?
But even if the heroes are fun to watch, I'd argue that the villains are more interesting and add a lot of spice to this series with what's happening in the castle. As the big villain of the games and wants to kill all of humanity, you'd expect Dracula to be this maniacal, mustache-twirling villain that is the embodiment of evil. However, he's actually a lot more complex and even more sympathetic than that. The reason why he has such a grudge on humanity is because of how some powerful leaders of the church have murdered his human wife Lisa not long after she asked him to be more open to the world instead of keeping himself locked in the castle. However, with such a massive plan, it's obvious that he's just acting out emotionally than just logically. In truth, he doesn't really have much of a plan of how to pull it off or even cares of how well it's going. He's pretty much given up on life and is forever unhappy because the one thing that brings him joy is now gone. But this attitude did not go unnoticed in his realm. While Dracula did bring in a legion of vampires to help his mission, their relationship with him becomes more complicated, as there are some like Carmilla who seeks to dethrone him from his leadership role so that she can restore order in the vampire conquest, while others, like the Forge Masters Hector and Isaac, stay loyal to Dracula and will stop at nothing to get rid of anyone that gets in his way. Well, at least that is the case with one of them. It's just so fascinating to see the disorder within Dracula's court, where there's kind of this secret war that's happening inside the castle. And while hell is being unleashed on the people, there's not even a straight idea of what's even going to happen or how his plan will be executed. There is as much chaos inside as much as there is out.
What matters more? Wiping the earth of the humans you hate and submitting to your own death? Or coddling a broken old man?
I can see why this was saved from development hell. It's got the amazing action and visuals that you'd expect from Castlevania, plus the addition of some really good storytelling that knows how to deliver complex characters and a hint of humor to make the experience fun. However, some of what I've talked about here only applies to the first 2 seasons, which is only 12 episodes in total. By the time that we get into the rest of the show with season 3 and 4, that's when Castlevania becomes an entirely different series. Oh, and be warned, by the way, there will be some spoilers ahead. One thing I will say that I was surprised about is how early they killed off Dracula, since the first 2 seasons are from the original script that was made back in the late 2000s. After that, there is still most of the show to go through with 20 episodes to go. What more could Castlevania do after killing off the franchise's antagonist? Well, the best way to put it is that the series goes into the direction of The Last Jedi, where the plot is separated in several parts that focuses on an individual main character. There's Trevor and Sypha, who are trying to solve a mystery in the village of Lindenfeld. There's Alucard, who's dealing with being all alone in his father's castle. There's Isaac, who builds an army of demons to seek revenge on those who betrayed Dracula. And there's Carmilla, who takes the role of the new antagonist as she and the Council of Sisters have their own plan of making the human population their livestock while they hold Hector captive to make demons for them. I'll say right now that many of what people love from before is still intact and is still as engaging as ever. The animation is still top quality, the action scenes are epic, the characters are still charismatic and we get to see some extra layers to them, and there's still some thought-provoking commentary, this time being about both the cruelty and the kindness of humanity.
Maybe we do all deserve to die, but maybe we could be better too.
But unlike before, there's just one element that failed to catch up to the standards of what it established: the plot lines. Some could make the argument that the first two seasons did the same thing, where the focus often swaps from character to character, but at least there was a clear connection to all of those narratives where it feels like they're all telling this one epic story. With season 3 and 4, everybody is out doing their own thing and to achieve their own goal, and very little was done for those plot lines to link one another. The only time does it ever start coming together is halfway through season 4, and this is where you find the biggest problem of the series. Considering how both seasons take the majority of the show, all of the characters remain separated for a total of 15 episodes. That is nearly half of the entire program! It honestly sucks because they've established such great chemistry among the characters, and that played a key role in making Castlevania engaging to watch. And seeing that being taken away afterwards makes it feel disappointing and takes way too much time before we ultimately see everyone get together again, leaving the viewer with this continuous feeling that there's something that's missing that keeps it away from being as great as before. At the same time, the segregation also causes other problems to emerge, like the feeling of repetitiveness. As interesting as the concepts can get, everyone is either doing one of two things. They're either fighting in an action scene, or they're explaining exposition. And with all the different narratives happening at the same time, it's often dizzying trying to keep track of what is happening in each scenario as they keep going back and forth of what they're doing. Not to mention that some plot elements end up repeating what the series did before, like Carmilla actually being the new Dracula, where her motives are actually emotional from her hatred towards humans. The only time they did something different is when some had sex. And that was only in the 9th episode of season 3, where it constantly jumps to every plot point. Seriously, it was a whole episode of action scene having sex, action scene having sex, action scene having sex, action scene Alucard gets a dick up the butt. Oh, and the sex scenes end in betrayal. I know, I'm going pretty hard on this, so let me go and pick up the mood by mentioning how the voice acting is pretty good here. Granted, some of the voices can sound a bit like mumbling, but the actors do put in some solid raw emotion to really make their characters feel genuine. Even later on in the show, I was surprised to find some familiar names involved, like Malcolm McDowell as Varney and Bill Nighy as Saint Germain.
Well, a rounded education is a good thing. The stories I could tell you about my days in the slums of Paris.
I'm Varney, Nightmare of London, Terror of the British Isles, King Vampire Coxman of all Europe.
This is not to say that I hate season 3 and 4. Again, most of the great stuff from before is still there, and it did offer an epic finale to cap off the entire show. It's just that it started off so beautifully with the first 2 seasons, but then the rest wasn't able to get on that same level. Still solid as is, but I just love what it did with the first 2 seasons, and I can personally be satisfied with just watching that. But am I satisfied with watching the whole series as is? Actually, yes. Yes, I am. Castlevania is not only one of the best video game adaptations, especially one that was turned into a series, but easily one of the best adult animated shows on Netflix. Almost every element is nailed beautifully in order to deliver an unforgettable experience packaged in just 32 episodes. The story is solid to bring its audience to the world of vampires and demons, the characters are full of charm and have fascinating depth, it provided some intelligent commentary on religion and humanity, the animation is stunning with how it gorgeously brings the games to life, and the action gives out the right amount of intensity to always have the viewer be on the edge of their seat. Sure, the third and fourth season may not be as strong as the first two, but they all still culminate into one epic adventure. Again, this is probably not the show for people who are not a fan of violence, but outside of that, this is absolutely worth checking out if you want a good dose of animated action. By the way, you know what's as awesome as Trevor taking down demons? Subscribing to my channel. Seriously, I hear that subscribing makes you feel like a vampire who drank a whole body's worth of blood.
Oh, bless your dead little hearts.
I may not be holding a controller, but this is a version of Castlevania I will never forget, which is why I'm giving this a 9 out of 10 and the Animat seal of approval. I dare say that this is even better than a lot of the games. As someone who loves looking into the stories of how animated projects get made, I can't help but find this one so fascinating. Not many projects are able to get themselves out of development hell. But when they do, there's often an inspiring reason attached to it. In the case of Castlevania, that idea turned out to be so strong that it managed to get a second opportunity. And the craziest thing is that I'm sure that there was a time when people wouldn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, especially in an era when adapting video games was considered hopeless. Even nowadays, when movies and shows based on games are actually getting significantly better, who would have guessed that a Castlevania adaptation would turn out to be this good? I mean, I'm just saying. See you later, dudes.
We have a second chance.
And a brand new future.